Hey guys, welcome to Age of Wonders Planetfall unit unboxing. This video looks at the Dvar Trencher. So the Trencher is a Tier 1 core biological light infantry unit, and it has one of the probably the most unique skill mechanics, at least for an early game unit, in the game. And it definitely separates it from other core units of other factions, makes it play a little bit differently. Your approach to tactical combat's a little bit different with this unit, but they're very effective. They're naturally really resilient. They come with 40 hit points and 3 armor, which is really pretty good for a tier 1 unit. Um, there's also a lot of tech unlocks that in the Dvar path that will kind of add to this natural resilience. But once you get the sort of cadence of moving around and entrenching around the tactical map, and with support from some of the other units that the faction has access to, these things become a really good value proposition. So let's look at their skills in more detail. So first up for the Trencher is the Spike Gun skill. Spike Gun is a single action, which is important, and you'll see why here in a minute. 16 kinetic damage with 7 range, affected by line of sight. The damage, note that the damage is increased by 20% when the unit is in a trench. So there's a nice little buff there. If your trench, which we haven't talked about the entrench skill yet, but if your unit is in a trench and using the spike gun skill, you get a nice little damage buff. It's obviously a really high output damage skill. In the single action on it kind of offsets the fact that this unit doesn't have any repeating skills. But really you want to prioritize mods and effects that are centered more around burst damage instead of applying debuffs and other things like that based on hitting frequently. The 7 range isn't long. It's obviously outgunned by some of the more common 9 hex range stuff, but because we can build trenches as we push forward, and because this unit's pretty beefy to begin with, that's not going to be a problem. So the next skill that the Trencher has access to, it's their melee attack option. It's Shield Bash. So this is single action, 8 kinetic damage, 1 hex melee range. Hits for high impact, so it's going to stun, stagger, sorry. It'll stagger non-stagger resistant enemies, and it can also knock back light units. So it's not an exceptional skill, but it can be useful at times. Ideally, you're likely going to use this once you've pushed past your kind of first wave of trenches that you've built and you're pushing towards the enemy. 3 armor, the unit having access to a good armor supply to begin with means it's not going to fold in a melee combat setting. And getting the stagger effect and even the knockback here can be really useful. So knockback, if you haven't played with it much, it's actually pretty nice because there's a lot of stuff you can use it for. You can use it to bump targets away from cover, into range of other units, away from your own ranged units, or even some of the support effects and other things that armies have. So very useful. Not something you're going to want to use for damage, because again, it's just single action. It's not much damage you're going to get out of this, but there's a decent bit of functionality in some cases that you'll find with this one. So it's worth noting. Okay, and then last up here for their active skills is the entrench ability. This is obviously the bread and butter unit ability here, is being able to build this cover that also provides an accuracy buff to any unit standing in the trench. And like we mentioned before, it combines with the spike gun skill. So if you've got a trencher unit in a trench, as you'll see here, you're not only getting a damage buff, but you're also getting an accuracy buff, which is really nice. The skill is on a 2-turn cooldown. But also most importantly, when you use this ability, it always ensures that your unit will be left 1 skill point after you use it, so that you can either shoot a spike gun or hunker down defensively if you need to, if you're in a really dangerous spot. And so once you kind of play more with this faction, you'll see that sort of the technique is to build sort of a frontline network of trenches as you close down the distance between you and your enemies. And also with some of the more effective and more powerful damage dealers coming behind this first wave of trenchers, you really can put a pretty serious beat down on enemies without really exposing yourself to much damage, at least for some of the other units that you'll have. So let's look at the progression for the unit. Sorry. So it's not really exciting, but it is very useful because we gain HP and accuracy through each level, 4 health, 5 accuracy, kind of alternating there. And eventually, once we get to prime rank, this unit will get the bypass cover passive ability, which ignores unit and cover penalties on ranged attacks, which is really nice because you're going to be attacking a lot with, with your spike gun. Hitting more effectively is super nice, and also having more health because we're going to be soaking up a lot of damage with this unit as well. It just all works really effectively. There's not much thought you have to put into it. Also note that the unit has a combat experience passive, so it's going to level up more quickly than the average unit. So it shouldn't be hard to get at least some of these guys to prime rank. And once you do, they're just even more effective. So certainly helpful. Like we've been kind of saying, tactically, this is a low cost sort of combat initiation unit, I'd call it. Bit of a damage sponge, and especially with some of the tech that you'll unlock, regardless of which branches you're in, really, but in the Dvar branch specifically, there's useful abilities that you'll find throughout, and you want to be building trenches almost every turn that you can, not just for these units to use, but also for your other units to use, because again, they'll get a accuracy bonus, and they'll obviously be in a position of cover, which is always nice. You can kind of understand where to set these things up on choke points or open areas around the map, and generally speaking, you'll be able to force the enemy to fight on your terms versus the opposite. The main thing to watch out for with this one is getting flanked. You'll see this guy does have the exposed flanks passive on it, so basically if it's getting flanked, 2 of its armor is ignored, so it means it can be more vulnerable to high burst damage flank attacks. If there's fast moving flanking units about, you might want to be using your defense mode, which prevents that flank, instead of just taking spike gun pot shots on your turns. But so hopefully you guys found that video helpful or useful or interesting or whatever, but I'm pretty sure most of you will agree this unit's is a pretty solid value proposition. Useful throughout the game, definitely really strong early on, early mid game, very good unit. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks for watching.